makes way for God's sufficiency, our inadequacy for his adequacy. And so the main scriptural stories we'll be looking at are four, the widow, the turning water into wine, the loaves and fishes, and Martha. So the problem of inadequacy. Well, personal areas of adequacy and inadequacies, obviously we all have them and we all feel challenges in them in lots of areas of life, not just the thought of showing hospitality. In connection with hospitality, there's different kinds of inadequacy or insufficiency. By the way, how's the volume now? Is it good?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, I put this one first because I think it's the one we most of us, and probably all of us would think of first. Just the inadequate amount of time. Just life is just too full to do extra things, including hospitality for others. Resources or facilities. I don't have enough space in my house. I don't have enough know-how. I don't have enough money. Ability and skills. I don't know how to do certain things. Experience. I never have prepared a meal for anyone other than my own family. Confidence, courage. I'm afraid to call up a stranger and ask them to come for a meal. These are all very obvious things. I'm moving quickly because we're late starting. Want to get more quickly to the main things that we need to think about and maybe have some discussion on. So let's just take the one of time first. And a comment on that from one of the books that I'm using, this is from the book by Prohl. She says, in a society in which even family members eat alone and on the run, we're often not aware of the significance of shared meals. But in most cultures, eating together expresses mutuality, recognition, acceptance, and mutual regard. Unless we intentionally break patterns, meaning the patterns of not eating together, not sitting down with others, we usually eat with people who are similar to ourselves. When guests and hosts are from different backgrounds, the intimacy of a shared meal can forge relationships which cross significant social boundaries. I think that's something that Benj was talking about when he shared last week at the end of our session. And that's from the book by Prohl, Making Room. So what does Prohl seem to be pointing to the root problem here? She's not actually saying the root is insufficient flexibility. What do you see she's actually said? Can you pick out some of the words she uses? See, even in that first sentence, often not aware of the significance of shared meals. And so that, I guess if we were aware of the value of those shared meals, we would make time. People make time for the things they really want to do, don't they? And so in Scripture, we have many examples of inadequacy and God's provision. And quite often it's a matter of insufficient resources or facilities or supplies. And so we have the wedding at Cana, which you could say is a shortage of a basic menu item. We might not think why it's a basic menu item in some of our gatherings, but in this context it obviously was a very serious shortage. Interestingly, Dorothy Sayers wrote a series of plays on the life of Christ. I'm just going through them again now with my online Sayers book group, but Sayers brought in a kind of a obscure idea, but I think it actually works. Why did they run out of wine? Was it because Mary was a close friend of the hostess? Seems like she was closely involved in the meal, and that Jesus and his 6 newly acquired disciples were suddenly known to be in the area and suddenly added to the guest list. Maybe that was why they ran out of wine. Which is, anyway, she puts that in the play. It's kind of a fun thing, you know. So, Jesus, a party crasher, not really, but the idea of being added at the last minute. It's sort of an interesting explanation of why they ran out of wine. But anyway, it's probably more likely poor planning, which we all are guilty of and have problems as a result of our lack of planning sometimes. And then the feeding of the 5,000 is actually more what you would call an unplanned gathering. Like when all these people suddenly show up at your house and you realize it's mealtime and You weren't expecting them, and you have very little, non-planned gatherings. So these are common situations in which advanced planning might have prevented the problem. So let's look at the wedding at Cana first. During the festivities, the wine ran out. So we'll pick up the story here. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." So, in some ways, this has been considered, certainly by Bible commentators, as one of the least admirable of Jesus' miracles. In what sense would it be the least admirable? Not thinking about hospitality now. I mean, obviously it works for our hospitality emphasis, but it kind of overlaps with the temptation in the wilderness to turn stones into bread, doesn't it? Which he refused. And it's the only miracle of its kind. There's nothing else in this category. And the purpose of it, if you look at John's emphasis at the end of the story, was that his disciples believed on him. But be that as it may, why did Jesus choose this type of miracle for the first miracle? That's not a question we can begin to answer, but it's one that makes a lot of sense when you consider what it shows about God as our provider. This is not. Okay. This divine rescue in a situation of hosting inadequacy underscores the divine characteristic of provider, God's being our provider in times of inadequacy. What other applications might there be from the story? It's another application you can make.
Wine is good for you.
I wasn't thinking of that one, though.
Does it prefigure his death and shedding of his blood in a rich?
It could prefigure Holy Communion, yeah, the shared wine at the end. But also the quality of what God provides being better than the quality of what man had provided. And then the feeding of the 5,000, there's a number of different stories of feeding of multitudes, of course. This is the account in Luke. As he went ashore, he saw a great throng, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a lonely place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go to the country and villages around about and buy themselves something to eat." No, this is not really working quite right. Okay. But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And I think in another version of it they say, because this is I think meant to be a little bit said facetiously because they don't have that much money. Another version it says, "If we even had that much, we wouldn't be able to buy it." And he said to them, "How many loaves have you? Go and see." When they had found out, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to sit down by companies upon the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. So like the disciples, I think we may be concerned about people in our visual field who are definitely in need. But we feel helpless because we assume we don't have the resources to meet such needs. This would be a way of applying, I think, that sometimes the resources are available, we just don't perceive where they will come from. The next story we want to look at is one of the extreme inadequacy of resources and God's provision. And that's the story of Elisha and the widow of Zarephath in Kings, 1 Kings. Now, this is earlier than in time than the Elisha story we looked at last week, where there was a rich woman that provided for Elisha. Sorry, this is Elijah. I've written it wrong. This is Elijah. It's earlier than the Elisha story. And so it's been noted by people who study the sort of parallel ministries and prophetic movement of both those prophets, Elijah and Elisha, that there's parallels. And one of the parallels is this hospitality situation. So, but this is the deliberate antecedent of what happened with Elisha. And so this is about a time of drought and a particularly needy person. The brook dried up because there was no rain in the land, and the word of the Lord came to him, meaning Elijah. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he rose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, Do not fear, go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make something for yourself and your son. For thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and her husband, and she and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. And there's another parallel to last week's story. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance, to cause the death of my son. And he said to her, Give me your son. And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, See, your son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, Now I know that you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord is in your mouth is truth. So we didn't necessarily read it all, but it's just such a great story, and it's so interesting to see that it's so similar in so many of the parts of it to the later story of the rich woman providing for Elisha. But the hospitality situation here is quite different. In the later story, the Elisha story, it's a very well-off woman, provides a room in her home, continual hospitality. This is the other extreme. There's not only not affluence and not just insufficiency, but real poverty. And so the question comes to our mind, can the impoverished be expected to show hospitality? This is where I feel that preparing this study, as I did a few years ago and spending more time developing it now, has really opened my mind to a lot of things about hospitality that I hadn't really thought about before. Insufficiency is a necessity of godly hospitality. Prohl in Making Room says, hospitality requires the kind of courage that lives close to our limits, continually pressing against the possible, yet always aware of the incompleteness and inadequacy of our own responses. Living so close to the edge of sufficient resources increases our dependence on and our awareness of God's intervention and provision. Those who practice substantial hospitality live in the tension between finiteness and grace, heartbreak and miracle, tragedy and gift. That's on your hand if you want to look at it and think about it more, because I think it's very profound there. Now, I should mention to you again, those of you who weren't here last week, that this book, Pohl by Christine Pohl, is about the history of hospitality in the church. And a lot of the hospitality it talks about is general for within the church as a body and within the church historically. She's not just talking about it in individual homes, although it applies to individual homes, many of the things that she observes. So there's different kinds of poverty. The insufficiencies we mentioned earlier, lack of ability and skills and lack of experience. But the more serious barriers to hospitality are, of course, emotional insufficiencies, lack of courage, lack of faith in God to provide, and even lack of compassion. And so Jesus made a connection between lack of faith and hardness of heart. And in the epilogue to the feeding of the multitudes in Mark's gospel, this is the situation that develops. The disciples have forgotten to bring bread. This is just the disciples and Jesus are together. It's not when they're with a group. Except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, it is because we have no bread. So instead of paying attention to the point he's making, which is not a point about hospitality at all, of course, they're starting to feel guilty because of their lack of provision. They said, is he aware that we goofed and we didn't bring enough? And so Jesus scolds them then. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? Don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves to the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? And so there's different kinds of inadequacy here, isn't there? They're not understanding. They're failing to see and hear and remember. And there's hardness of heart. Jesus accused them of hardness of heart. So he connects this hardness of heart, which I think we would probably call lack of compassion, with a lack of faith. There's a connection between them. And so I'm trying to slow down a little bit as we talk about Martha, because there's a lot here to think about. Martha, an emotionally inadequate hostess. I don't know if you find that a funny label for her. If someone was to ask you, in what way was Martha inadequate, what would you say? I mean, I think it's quick to say it wasn't important to prepare food, but I don't think that's the right answer. It's always important to prepare food. You had to have someone prepare the food. That's not really the point, is it? She say something, Jim?
No, I mean that's why it's so challenging, right? Like what she was trying to do was a good thing, but the method or the prioritization was wrong.
Yeah.
She didn't take time to connect
Yeah.
with
Well,
her.
her spirit towards what she was doing, too. It's very short. For the amount there is in it and for the amount that's talked about and written about, it's a very, very short passage. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. So it sounds like she's the older, she's the homeowner. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So in thinking about this for quite a while, when I was putting this together a few years ago, this is the way I'm breaking it down. I think she starts off in the right. There's nothing wrong with her busyness and her hard work. And she doesn't have to be exactly like Mary. She's Martha, she's not Mary. her first problem is what?
And so she's distracted.
Distracted. She loses her focus,
Anxious.
becomes frustrated. So she loses her cool and her becomes impatient.
She's bitter toward her sister.
Someone,
She's bitter towards her sister.
and then her second problem is the sense of being treated unfairly. The idea of placing blame on someone else. Maybe Mary would have helped her if she had asked. Maybe Mary did help her sometimes, but maybe Mary frequently didn't help her when she could have, for reasons of her own. She didn't like doing it, or Martha would rather do it herself and then blame Mary for not doing it. There's people like that too, right? We don't know the reasons why Mary wasn't helping. Certainly Mary wasn't going to be in charge. Martha was going to be in charge. We don't know the reasons, but the second problem is the sense of sort of like making yourself the martyr. It's so easy to fall into that when you're working hard in the kitchen, isn't it? Becoming the martyr. And this escalates into real anger and casting blame. And so what she needs and she receives is a reminder that she has allowed herself to become distracted. Jesus says, you're burdened, you're worried about many things. There's something better to focus on. And so I think this certainly applies to the pitfalls that many hostesses face. Losing focus in the course of all that you are doing. And I think it's really, really helpful to look at how Martha appears in later accounts of her in the scriptures, in the gospel narrative. In John 11, the story of the raising of Lazarus, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. Now notice it's Martha who goes first, not Mary. But Mary remains seated in the house. So there's a closeness there, and there's a faith, and there's an earnestness there in Martha. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. And then, later, in John 12, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. And so she's still the hostess. It's her form of worship. So the fact that she's serving doesn't have to involve being distracted and being overburdened. Her temperament is different from Mary's. She is more active and less contemplative, I think. And she's probably still prone to panic when she gets overwhelmed. It's probably just a personality trait. But the point is that her hostessing was inadequate in the first instance because she lost focus and because her spirit became wrong. So the idea of inadequacy is tied to something I introduced last week, and that's the idea that Christian hospitality is countercultural. And so Christianity is countercultural. In fact, there's a wonderful book by John Stott on the Sermon on the Mount about Christianity as being countercultural. But how I want to break that down for you now is to say that popular culture equates the quality of our resources, skills, and personality with the quality of our hospitality. Christian hospitality recognizes no such equation. The quality of our resources, skills, and personality are not a sign of the quality of our hospitality. How can poverty facilitate hospitality? Here's another quotation from Paula. I keep wanting to put an R in her name. It's pronounced as if it was P-O-L-E, but it's P-O-H-L. She says, Christian hospitality, and here she's talking more worldwide than I think in our immediate experiences, but I still think it's something we should be aware of. Christian hospitality is generally practiced in the context of scarcity. A scarcity which is often the result of human injustice. And its relation to God's abundance is quite complex. In offering hospitality, we live between the wisdom of God's kingdom, in which there is enough, even abundance, and the hard realities of human life. And there, of course, she's talking particularly about the ministry to the poor, immigrants, refugee camps, this kind of hospitality. So poverty facilitating hospitality is touched on by Henry Nouwen in his book Reaching Out. I'll be quoting from that quite a bit next week. He says, once we have given up our desire to be fulfilled, we can offer our emptiness to others. Once we have become poor, we can be a good host. It is indeed the paradox of hospitality that poverty makes a good host. Blessing others through hospitality is not only possible for people who lack material resources, it is poverty that most often fosters the true generosity of spirit and leads to a profound outpouring of hospitality. My mind, as I was preparing this, went to a passage in an introduction that C.S. Lewis wrote. C.S. Lewis collected an anthology of sayings from George MacDonald. He's a 19th century writer he was very fond of. And in the foreword, in the preface to that, he provided an account of MacDonald's life. He was a preacher for most of his life, but more a writer towards the end. His lungs were diseased and his poverty was very great. Literal starvation was sometimes averted only by those last-minute deliverances which agnostics attribute to chance and Christians to providence. It is against this background of reiterated failure and incessant peril that his work can most profitably be read. His resolute condemnations of anxiety come from one who has a right to speak. His peace of mind came not from building on the future, but from resting in what he called the holy present. He appears to have been a sunny, playful man, deeply appreciative of all the really beautiful and delicious things that money can buy, and no less deeply content to do without them. That resonates in my mind so much. I go to beautiful gardens and I say, oh, I should have a better garden. Beautifully decorated. Oh, I should have a more beautifully decorated home. But to enjoy the beauties without needing to assimilate them. It is perhaps significant, it is certainly touching, that his chief recorded weakness was a Highland love of finery. And he was, all his life, hospitable, as only the poor can be. So facing our own inadequacies, our own handful of flour and a little oil in a jug. So we have, inadequacies of resources, abilities, and time. And we have inadequacies of motivation, compassion, faith. Which issues need practical solutions and which need spiritual solutions? I think that's an easy question to answer, isn't it? More practical solutions for the first group, and more spiritual solutions for the second group. And I have in the handout, I felt kind of silly including it, but I had there so that maybe nobody will be offended, some practical suggestions for if you're doing a dinner for people, you're not used to doing for a group, this little guys, and maybe they're too obvious for anyone who'd be likely to do a dinner, and for those of you who are not likely to do a dinner for a group, you don't need to read them anyway, but I just thought I'd put them in because I first did this for a ladies group, so. But anyway, on the spiritual solutions though, I think we could take a few moments, and I think we are going to have a little bit of time for discussion. I'm almost done with the points I want to share. On the spiritual solutions, I think maintaining focus, like we talked about with what Martha lost, focus on the mandate for and purpose of Christian hospitality, recognizing our own insufficiency and leaning on Christ's sufficiency, rejoicing in or celebrating our inadequacy, cultivating joy. Joy is the opposite of fear. Zeal can be seen as the opposite of reluctance. And I gave you a number of scriptures there. I'm not including them all. Scriptures on the handout. God meets those who joyfully work righteousness. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? So some questions to ponder as you go away, and these are not the ones we necessarily need to talk about now. I'm going to throw it open for discussion of anything that I've brought up. But the relationship between hospitality and our attitudes towards property and possessions. That will come in more next week as we talk about entertaining strangers. How is our sense of inadequacy being affected by personal cultural changes? What is the relationship between hospitality and seeing ourselves as aliens and sojourners? Again, that's something we'll address more next week. And then there's a few personal questions too on the paper that I didn't. I'll go over now, but I just love this stanza from Leonard Cohen's anthem. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I quoted from that last week at the end. I think that's the way you need to look at, the offerings that you do, the things that you do for the Lord. And the next week, I'll cover the two topics, honoring individuality and approaching intimacy. So I did move very quickly, but a lot of it I'm sure is things that you would have thought about before, and certainly passages of scripture would be familiar with. So comments and questions.
Janice?
Yeah.
I love the use of biblical stories as types for these things that we're talking about. Is there? It seems like we're talking about Christian hospitality working by tapping into different resources than what we're typically aware. Is that one way to think about
Yes.
seeing resources as coming from another place?
I'm thinking what are my strengths? What is it I do? Am I better with just having another family over with children? But then if you feel like you just go crazy if there's too many kids, figure out a time to just, not do it that way. Just, think about your strengths, your weaknesses, and what options you have. But like I said last week, hospitality is an attitude towards people rather than a set of practices, an open-heartedness. So to call someone up and say, I've been seeing you for a long while, let's go for coffee. Can we meet and go for a walk? Because you're fitting them into your schedule. You're still, in a sense, you're still hosting because you initiate, you suggest a time and a place. So I think that bringing people into your life, into your schedule, certainly food, and we'll talk again more about the food aspect of it next week as well. But I think that food is symbolic, and like one of the quotations I had last week was that a shared meal is the activity most similar to the kingdom of God, expression of the kingdom of God. So certainly sharing a meal. It doesn't have to be sharing a whole meal, but sort of sharing time with people. Is inadequacy a problem then for a lot of people in entertainment?
I think it's somewhat perceived inadequacy though, because I think there's a lot of hospitality is sort of like an industry, and trying to sell us on things in order for us to be able to be hospitable. Supposedly, you have to have the decor, and you have to have the serving trays and the things that you can buy.
Yeah.
And if you don't have those, how could you possibly host? And then we think, oh well, we can't host then. But I think reframing it the way that you did, as opposed to seeing it as we have to have all this stuff and it has to look Instagram perfect or whatever, versus
Yeah.
hey, you know, it doesn't have to look a certain way, it's more a matter of kind of like Martha, like an attitude of heart.
For sure.
Yeah, and with that, yeah, it's so easy to think, I will be someone who hosts and is hospitable once I have the staff to do it, once I have the resources. And just like so many other things in the Christian faith, we have to just start small, start by serving and hosting with what we have. It's easy as a college student to think like, oh, if only I like had a house where I could cook people meals and then I could really host people.
Yeah.
But you start with your dorm room, you start small,
Yeah.
and then you're training yourself to do that, to be obedient in that. And then when God gives you more, you're able to continue obeying there. You can always keep making it too small, like my house is too small, there's not enough parking, just once I have the next thing, then I can do it. We have to do it now.
Yeah, and you have to be sensitive to people too, and I've been guilty of this very much in the past, because I love to cook, and, you know, and I remember one time first when we lived here back, 25 years ago, we were living in Grove City, and I invited some folks in that I hadn't had before, but they were a couple of couples from the college, and I felt like I made like a steak, chicken croquettes, potato croquettes. They were kind of fiddly, but I had fun doing it, and I don't know what else I did, but anyway, it was a big mistake. But the worst mistake was what happened in the conversation after. So this pastor's wife, who I had met a few times and chatted with just the other functions, I really wanted to be friends with her. I thought we had a lot in common. She followed me out to the kitchen. And she said, Janice, I have to tell you something. She said, I can't cook. I can barely get something on the table for my family that's edible. I cannot cook. And I was stunned because I knew what she meant. She meant, why have you done this for me? I can't cook, I can't reciprocate. And later I thought, I should have said, are you telling me that you can't be my friend because I can cook and you can't? That makes no sense. You see what I mean? But you don't think about the time. At the time, I was in the wrong, but I think I could have made it better if I responded properly at that time. I mean, they had a farm and they had goats. I would love to have seen their farm. I never saw it. I was humiliated. Like because I had humiliated her. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
You know, I felt like I had humiliated her, and then I felt humiliated. It was just like it was sort of my hobby, but you have to be careful when you do things for people, but you can't always know, whether they would be offended by certain things or not. We have about 1 more minute, I think. Anybody else with a comment? Question? Well, thank you for coming, and next week we'll talk about the last 2 topics which I can cover together. And I encourage you to think about getting those books, particularly the one by Now on Reaching Now. It's great.
That's not what I'm